Welcome to
Crazy, right?
A podcast
Be your own person.
for those affected by
Crazy, right?
mental health.
I wanted to just try it.
Crazy,
It's something that I've struggled with for a while.
Featuring live improvised music
Now I finally got my head right again.
by your host,
am I right? Crazy,
It feels good to talk about it.
right? Crazy, right?
Dave Asher.
My guest today is Tim Davis. He is the author of Tripolar, the story of a bipolar triathlete. He is also a coach, science teacher, 12-time Ironman finisher, and 7-time 100-mile endurance run finisher. Tim, thanks for joining me here today online. Let's connect our computers and see what happens. How did you come to learn about my podcast?
Well, I started looking around for podcasts that could relate to people with mental health issues. Because recently, in the last year, I decided I wanted to advocate more for mental health issues, and I Google searched and found you. So,
And was there, could you take me a little bit on the journey of what led you to want to become an advocate for mental health? Was there a period when you were potentially not open about your mental health and then you decided you wanted to change that?
yes, there was actually a very long period. I was first diagnosed with type 2 bipolar when I was 27 years old, and I am 46 years old now, so only about a year ago or so did I decide I'm going to, share about this more openly. I pretty much kept it anonymous. Close family members and a few close friends knew. Because I work 12-step programs, I believe in anonymity, and because I'm a high school teacher, I felt like I might be judged or discriminated against, that it might be held against me in one way or another. In case, maybe I had a...
Would you take me back to when you were 27 and give me a little bit, you say you were diagnosed when you were 27, correct?
That is correct.
Would you take me back, Tim, to a little bit of your experiences that led you to that diagnosis? What was your life like when you were 27, or maybe the couple years prior that led you to seek a diagnosis? What was your life like at that time?
My life was pretty dark. I describe it as, I was a train wreck. I had my first kid when I was 25, and then I had my second kid when I was 27. And when I was 25, I realized, holy shit, I need to get sober. Because, I was using marijuana and alcohol every day and sometimes cocaine. And then I got into methamphetamine. And when I actually got diagnosed, I was coming out of my third rehab. And I couldn't sleep at all in rehab. I was in rehab for like 2 weeks. And I just had major insomnia. I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but I was in a manic episode. Because I figured, I should have been able to sleep a lot. And then after I got out of the rehab, my wife didn't want me to move back home, and I didn't really have anywhere to stay. And I got in this really dark place where I thought, you know what? I don't know how to live sober. I don't know how to live not sober. And so I was going to commit suicide. And I was going to go jump in front of a train. And I, wrote this long letter, and I called my wife, my mom, and I said, you guys are all better off without me. I'm out. And I went to these train tracks and started walking by the train tracks. And luckily, my wife called some authorities, and they came and swooped me up before I could do anything stupid, because obviously I'm still here, thank God. And then I ended up in a suicide tank for a week. And then that's when I was diagnosed with bipolar, was after being there. And then I was put into like the regular dual diagnosis unit. And it was hard for me at first. I didn't want to believe I was bipolar. It was hard enough accepting that I was an addict and alcoholic, and now I got this other problem too, So...
Would you take me back a little bit with respect to the addiction and the alcoholism and the marijuana? Would you recall for me maybe the first experience you had with drinking or smoking weed or methamphetamines, even if it's going back to childhood? What is your first recollection in terms of the first time you got drunk?
Well, I'm the third oldest of 7 children, and my older brother is 4 years older than me. And he let me do whatever he did. So I was 8 years old when we were stealing liquor out of my dad's liquor cabinet and beer from our dad and our friends' dads. So I was 8 years old the first time I got drunk, and I loved the buzz. I think I was always, looking back, having done 12-step work in inventory, I was always an anxious kid. I've always had anxiety. And when I drank and got that buzz, that just anxiety was lifted. I felt like everything was okay. I didn't feel like I had to be nervous all the time, that I didn't fit in. All my insecurities left me. So I love that feeling, and I sought it as often as I could get it from that age.
And where was this? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, but we moved when I was 3, and then we moved to southern West Virginia for a few years. And we actually moved to Morgantown when I was 8. I was in 3rd grade. So here I was, new kid, new school again, with those anxieties, And in West Virginia, there's not much to do. I mean, now I've lived in LA the last 30 years, and there's almost anything you want to do here. But in West Virginia, it's pretty rural. And other than playing outside in the woods, there's not much to do. So we get bored, and a lot of people there drink and do drugs. I mean, the opioid epidemic's huge back home. I got several friends I went to high school with that are not alive now because of the opioid epidemic. So I'm kind of glad I got out of there.
So that use of drugs and alcohol as a way to reduce anxiety and as also something to do, that carried with you all the way through middle school and high school?
Yeah. As an 8 and 9-year-old, I was 9 years when my brother, introduced me to marijuana, and we'd smoke weed here and there. And middle school kind of did it, on the weekends or, a few times a month. It wasn't like all the time because we couldn't afford to get stuff all the time. And then when I was 13, there was a tragic event that happened. My dad died. He fell off a balcony. We were playing chase. He was chasing me. It was like, ha, 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 I'm going to get you. We were having these tickle wars, and I ran out on the balcony. I'm like, you're not going to catch me. And I ran down the balcony, and I ran back inside the other entrance into the master bedroom. And I was like halfway downstairs when I heard my sister just scream this god-awful scream. It's like, never heard somebody scream like that before in my life. And for a moment, I just thought, whoa, maybe my dad fell. And I ran downstairs, on our driveway, and he had landed head first. His head was smashed in, and he was just, almost lifeless, and it was just crazy. And then, my older brother found out what happened later. He came home from work. My mom went to my dad with the hospital. My brother came home later that night and blamed me for my dad's death and went on to severely beat me. So my dad beat me and my older brother pretty hard. My older brother beat me really hard. So there was a lot of physical abuse as a child. But after that event is when I really I remember upon doing my 12-step inventory, that's in rehab, they're like, when did you start, drinking and using to escape pain and negative feelings? And it was definitely that event of my father dying at age 13 and me being blamed for his death by my older brother is when I sought to just drown that out with drugs and alcohol every chance I got, and then just anytime negative feelings came up, like I had a fight with a girlfriend or whatever, then I just had to get loaded because I didn't want to feel those negative feelings.
And that sounds like a really a life-altering experience, obviously. In terms of examining that, it sounds like you have some insight into how that trauma has played into your interpersonal relationships and into your relationship with your addictions. I'm interested to know when you are in a manic state, does your father or his energy ever play a role in your mindset when you are experiencing either racing thoughts or mania or an up cycle?
I would have to say, yeah. I think about that from time to time. I still have racing thoughts, and I have hypomania. I haven't had a real manic episode in like 11 years, but I still get hypomania periods because I'm a rapid cycler. And in the last 10 years, I've kind of found exercise as like a therapy for me to kind of treat my hypomania. And some people say I'm an obsessive exerciser, but when I exercise and when I do a lot of marathons and triathlons, and sometimes when I'm not feeling well, I just think, think about my dad dying and my brother blaming for his death, and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna show my older brother, I'm gonna make my dad proud. Those kind of thoughts go in my head and motivate me to keep getting to the finish line of these marathons and triathlons.
Has there been, and I definitely want to get to the marathons and the triathlons shortly. Has there been, what has been the end of that story with your brother blaming you for your father's death? Has there ever been, he's still in your life? Has there been ever an amend made on either side of that, of the resentment you felt towards him for blaming you, or him having a stance that he no longer blames you? Does he still blame you? What's the rest of that story there?
That happened as a teenager, and no, he doesn't blame me anymore. He made it clear later. I don't remember if it was that year, but later in high school, he said it wasn't my fault. But I still carried that with me. And then when I went to rehab, one of the times I was in rehab, I think it was around age 26 or 27, he actually flew out here, for a family group, because he lives back in West Virginia. And, at the family group meeting, he shared about, his experience and apologized for blaming, me for my dad's death then. And at the time, I was barely just a few days sober, and I was just pissed off at the world, and I basically told him, fuck you. I don't know if we're allowed to use bad words on this podcast, but I had a lot of nice words to say. His apology was not well received, and then he got a resentment, and he's kind of never really forgiven me for that. He's held a grudge about me not accepting his apology when I was in rehab since then, and that was 15 years ago, so we haven't really spoke much in the last 10 years.
Now, I'm familiar with the notion of a resentment with respect to a 12-step fellowship. In your examination of your, one might say, personal inventory and resentments, are there other examinations you've done with respect to that traumatic event? Have you felt or examined the aspect of this where your own relationship with your association with your role in your father's accident, have you felt a burden or a connection to relieving yourself of the burden of blaming yourself for it at all?
Well, from age 13 to like 27, I carried that with me, and I was basically an atheist. I didn't believe in God. I was raised Catholic, but at age 13 when that happened, I'm like, if there's a God, why would he let this happen to me and my family? And my mom was stranded with 7 kids, ages 2, 3, 5, 11, 13, 17, and 18, and she was a stay-home mom. She had to go back to work, and so we never saw her anymore. And, I just didn't believe in God. Why would God let this happen? But, upon working the steps, I had to find a higher power, and I'm certainly not the creator of the universe. The universe is greater than me, so the universe is my higher power. And having done the steps and made amends, I've written, when I went through all the 12 steps and I was doing my amends, I went to my dad's grave, and I read this long letter, and then my sponsor told me when I'm done with it, just to burn it up, and let that go. So I have let that go. I know it's not my fault. I don't carry it anymore. And that was very freeing for me.
With respect to your sponsor, obviously it's an anonymous fellowship, and I'm not interested, of course, in disrupting the anonymity or the personal, identifiable markers or anything. But as someone myself who is a member of fellowships and who is a little bit, I guess, shy with respect to welcoming a sponsor into my experience, and a little bit slow on the uptake to go through 12 steps. Could you, in as specific or broad strokes as you care to, explain to me the value, in your experience, the value of a sponsor, or maybe any of the ups and downs of the experience of giving that power to somebody to kind of run your recovery in some respects. Is it that they're running your recovery? What has your experience been like just with the notion or the experience of having a sponsor?
I could probably have a long answer to that question. Like, I went to my first 12-step meeting when my wife was pregnant with my son, but I didn't believe I had a problem. You know, in AA and NA and all the 12-step rooms, they say look for the similarities and not the differences. And when I first started going to 12-step meetings, all I did was look for the differences. Because I didn't want to be like you. I'm not like you guys. I'm not that bad. You know, the denial of the disease was so strong. You know, and then I finally started going to some more meetings, but then I didn't want to get a sponsor at first. And then when I did get a sponsor, I never really worked, past step 1, 2, or 3, and I didn't work them well enough. And every time I relapsed, I blamed my sponsor for the relapse. So then I was in this pattern where I fired my sponsor and I had to go find a new sponsor. And this is totally stupid alcoholic, drug addict thinking, because it was never the sponsor. It was always me. I just wasn't ready to look in the mirror yet. Until after I got tired of relapsing, because I went through from 1999 to 2004, I relapsed like a dozen times. I put together a year once, but the rest of the time I never put together more than 30, 60, or 90 days. And I finally got tired of doing that. I got into a car accident where I almost killed my baby brother, totaled my car, and that's kind of when I hit a bottom, and I'm like, all right, I got to just get a sponsor, do whatever the hell he says. And I made a commitment, like, I'm not going to drink or use till I finish all 12 steps. And if I feel like drinking after that, then gosh darn it, I'm going to drink. But when, halfway through the steps, like they say in step 9, the promises started coming true. And, but before I even got to step 9, it's definitely after step 4 and 5, I didn't feel the urge or the need to drink anymore. I had learned other coping mechanisms to not need to do that.
When you say learn other coping mechanisms, does that include exercise?
For sure. That's like my biggest coping mechanism for the last 10, 11 years because, meetings aren't always available, especially right now with COVID. There's Zoom meetings. But personally, for me and my, ADD, I have a hard time in Zoom meetings. I miss the real person meetings. I have a hard time focusing on a Zoom meeting.
I'm interested specifically, so in that period when you were going back to that, I'll say just for the sake of a relatable phrase, that moment of clarity of deciding that the promises were coming through in that step 9 and that it was working, and you needed something to focus your mind additionally on your recovery. At what year was it? Because I'm thinking it was probably before COVID, the first time that you experienced the therapeutic benefits of exercise. Could you take me to that, the first moment when you considered that as an inkling in your mind of like, oh, maybe I'll try exercise as a way to reduce stress or focus my recovery?
Well, the first time I saw that it could actually help me in my recovery was in 2009. My last relapse was in 2007. I had 3 years before that relapse, and then I had a 2-month relapse, but then I got sober. But when I got sober in 2007, I was 185 when I first got sober, and then I gained like 60 pounds in my first year of sobriety because I also am a food addict, and I go to the 12-step meetings and I just eat all the cookies, and my boys were little, and at family dinner, me and my wife and my kids would eat, and whatever they didn't finish on their plate, they just passed down to dad, and I'd wolf that food down. So in 2009, I remember December 31st, 2008, I stepped on the scale and it said 250. And I hated being over 200 pounds. And when I saw that the scale said 250, I'm like, wow, that rounds up to 300. So I made a commitment at a year and a half sober. I'm going to exercise at least, run a mile every day or do something every day and stop eating seconds, and started exercising. And during that time period, I started running every day. I had been a runner before. I ran track in high school, but I got back into running, and it just like the endorphins that I get from running, like I said before, you can't always get to a meeting, but if something's bugging me and I don't know what else to do it, I have this expression or this acronym for fear. There's a lot of different acronyms for fear, but the one I like is forget everything and run. when I have a problem and I just don't know what to do about it, and I can't get a hold of my sponsor or anybody else in the program, or maybe I just don't feel like talking about it, I go for a run. And I usually run at least 5 miles. And it takes me about 45 minutes, and my head clears. And a lot of times while I'm out there running, like the answer comes to me. It's like my higher power speaks to me while I'm running. I feel like I meditate while I'm running. And 2009 is definitely when I found exercise as kind of a panacea, or the third component of what I need to maintain my recovery and sobriety for both my drug alcoholism addiction and my bipolar.
And I want to get deeper into all that, but I'm curious when you started to experience that positive effect and meditative effect of the exercise and the running and the endorphins in 2009, how did that affect your relationship with your family, with your wife, and with your children?
Well, at first, everything was, getting better because I was in a better mood more often. I was less, angry and irritable and discontent. But then actually during that year, 2009, I did one more thing that I should mention. And, being diagnosed with bipolar in 2000, I think it was 2002, every time I relapsed, I went off my meds. And in 2009, when I weighed 250 pounds on January 1st, 2009, I also made a decision. I'm like, you know what? These meds I'm taking are what making me gain weight. And I was tired of being on this Depakote because it makes you hungry a lot. And I'm like, I'm going to stop taking my meds. So without telling anybody, my psychiatrist and my wife and anybody else, I went off my meds during that time when I lost the weight, because in those first 6 months of 2009, I dropped 60 pounds. But I was also getting manic again, and I didn't realize it. And I knew I didn't want to go back to using drugs and alcohol, so I just started going to more meetings and just started exercising more and became an exercise addict to try and calm my mania down. But, some of my other behaviors started getting a little crazy, like I started overspending, my libido was skyrocketing, and I was taking more and more risky behaviors, like I was jumping off bridges and cliffs. And then it kind of came to a head when I went skydiving one day and didn't tell anybody I was going. I just snuck off, and then I came back home, and my wife's like, "What'd you do today?" And I was like, "Oh, I went skydiving." And she just lost it, because like, what husband goes and skydives without telling their wife that they're going to go skydiving? That was very irresponsible. At the time, I thought it was funny. And then my wife's best friend is like, Tim's not acting right. Something's wrong. Is he still taking his meds? And then she confronted me, and I came clean. And that was I was off my meds for about 9 months. And she said, if you want to live in this house, you got to go back to your shrink and get back on your meds. Otherwise, you got to move out again, like before I was, when I could stay sober. So I did. And I was able to, get back on the meds without gaining the weight, because I just kept my exercise program going. And I had some fears about, gaining weight again, being on my medication, but I was able to do it. And I've been kind of an exercise addict ever since, just to keep the weight off and to help my brain stay sane. I just get really cranky if I don't get my exercise fix.
I can definitely relate to that. I feel like as an addict myself, I feel like at the end of the day, the only addiction that I can really ever commit to that would be a wise addiction to give into would just be an addiction to healthy living. Whether that means exercising every day, which I try and do, or being better about the things that I'm eating. So I understand that you are sharing your story of how exercise and health consciousness, both in terms of mental health and addiction, and also in terms of physical activity and a physical regimen, that you use that not only for yourself, but as a way to reach other people who might be struggling?
That is correct. In my last 10 years, since I really started exercising a lot, started running marathons again, I started doing Ironman triathlons, and one of my wife's friends and a couple people I know, they run dual diagnosis units, and they work with bipolars and depressives and people with anxiety. And a lot of them, the people they work with are either, they're in treatment or they're just having a hard time. And, my friend Michelle, she's a counselor. She's like, I'm trying to get them to exercise more. So she would have me come speak on these panels and just tell them what I've been up to and what I've been doing, and talk about doing these Ironmans and just how it helps me, And my message was, you don't have to go out and do an Ironman triathlon. I mean, just get out and, do something for 30 minutes, walk around the block. But that's really helped me just stay focused and stay out of trouble,
And is working in recovery and counseling and motivational that space, the motivational and recovery space? Do you, outside of that, do you have a career or a profession in addition to that?
Well, I'm a high school science teacher, and I have coached track at our school for 4 years, but I kind of have, a hard time motivating others when it comes to their own exercise routine, because I just believe in being self-motivated because I'm self-motivated. I have other friends and siblings who coach, and I think a good coach is constantly, for me in my experience, my coaches, they're constantly talking to you, they're constantly in your ear, and I personally don't like to talk that much. I'm kind of an introvert, and I like to consider myself a man of few words. So I coach by example or lead by example. When I coached track, the head coach, he did all the talking, and I just got out there and ran with the guys and said, we're doing this today, And if they wanted to complain, I'm like, I'm not hearing it. Let's just get this workout done. It's going to make us better, and you're going to perform better in your meet, So, I don't know.
So
Go ahead.
You're a high school track coach, and then did you also say a science teacher in there as well?
Yeah. I've been a high school biology teacher for almost 20 years now.
And so how has your employment history been in terms of the interaction with manic episodes or relapses? How has your work life been affected by your addictions and mental health and that journey?
Well, before I really got sober and, kind of recovered in 2007, I basically was not very employable, and I was never at any one place for more than 2 years. I joined the workforce in 1996 when I graduated from college, and I was at USC for 6 months, but I quit. It was boring. And then I started substitute teaching, and I was a regular teacher at one school, and then I bounced to another school for, I was 1 year at one school, another year at another school, and then I was like on unemployment because I was in rehab. So I was just like in and out of jobs and in unemployment from 1999 to 2004. And it wasn't until I got sober. During that 3-year sobriety period, I held a job for 2 years. But in 2007, I got sober and stayed sober, and I was at the same school for 12 years. And that's something I would talk about every year at my AA meeting when I'm taking my birthday cake. It's like, since I've been sober, I've had the same job at the same place. I'm just really proud of that because I couldn't do that before I got sober. I just never lasted anywhere very long. Like I said, I just wasn't very employable.
And in this current stretch of sobriety and employment, have you come out about that to these folks? Has there been a journey in your mind of feeling safe or inspired to share with these high school aged folks and their families your history with addiction and mental health?
For the most part, no. I've chosen to keep my anonymity. I was the department chair of the science for the science department for 5 years, and the other teacher who was science department chair, we both got at this school the same year, and we were there all the same years together, and we kind of did the activities outside of school, and I confided in him, and I confided in the track coach who was another science teacher, the head track coach. I told a couple coworkers, and then sometimes with students, there were a few students I did here and there confide, usually towards the end of the year when they were like seniors and graduating and going to move on. I usually didn't confide in with the 9th and 10th graders. I mostly taught 9th and 10th graders, but sometimes with the seniors when, they were about to graduate and go on into the real world, and we were talking about this or that, in between class or at lunch, I would confide that, yes, this has been an issue for me. More often than not, when students came to me with problems, with their significant other, brothers, sisters, parents, whatever, and one of them had a problem with, mental health issues or addiction, I would just, in a general way, say, I have family members very close to me that also suffer from those issues. But usually I meant myself, but to keep my anonymity, I just said I have family members very close to me that also suffer from those issues, and then I would share about it, you know, what they were going through, which is really what I was going through or had been through.
And was there a point, what is the current status of that notion of whether you are in or out about these things? Are you now open to the idea that a parent or a child just knows that you have literature out, that you are sharing your story with people sort of more on the record?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I'm going to go around and like with a loudspeaker and, you know, yell to everybody. But, you know, I've written this book that just came out this month, and it's all about, you know, tripolar, the story of a bipolar triathlete. And, you know, the cat's out of the bag. I'm taking a leap of faith, you know. In this day and age, you know, supervisors and companies aren't supposed to discriminate against somebody for having any kind of special needs or, you know, mental health issues or other disabilities. So, you know, and I've shown that I can suit up and show up. I've been a responsible worker for the last 13 years. So I feel like they can't hold that against me. And if they do, I mean, there could be some other, you know, repercussions from that. I mean, hopefully that won't happen. But yeah, I'm working on being more open about it because I want to break the stigmas. You know, myself, I've, you know, had a hard time with the stigmas for the last several years.
Would you go into that a little bit? Do you feel that the stigma of people's views on addiction or mental illness, how has that interacted with your story, whether it's with respect to you not seeking or accepting the help you need or the diagnosis, or is there a shame factor or you know, relationship with your family? How has that stigma influenced your story prior to feeling like you wanted to do something to break that stigma? How did the stigma influence you?
Wow. I guess the stigma kind of led me to just keep my mouth shut a lot of the time because, I mean, I just want so badly to be normal or considered whatever normal is and not have... You know, when I first got diagnosed bipolar, I thought, you know, this means I'm crazy, you know, and I don't think anybody wants other people to think they're crazy, whether they are or not. I remember my sponsor said, he's like, you know, he's like, crazy people don't wonder whether they're crazy or not because they don't even realize they're crazy. So he's like, you got to be sane if you ask yourself whether you're crazy or not because crazy people have no idea they're crazy. So that kind of made me feel good. But even today, I still have shame about it. It's hard for me to just like be open about it with anybody. Writing this book was like, I don't know, tearing off the Band-Aid. It's a huge leap of faith. And hopefully... you know, it'll be all right. It's a moment-by-moment thing, how I feel about, you know, my bipolar diagnosis. And often I question, you know, if I do something that may seem a little strange to somebody else, are they just going to, you know, think it's because I'm bipolar or because I'm crazy, you know? Because normal people do some crazy stuff sometimes, too, or whatever people who don't have mental health issues are, if there's such a thing.
Do you feel, in this moment, do you feel like being bipolar is in some ways a defect of who you are?
I did for a long time. I would say I don't now, because now I know how to manage it between staying on my medication, which I've been med compliant for 11 years now, and working my 12 steps and maintaining my exercise program. It's a lot of work sometimes, but because I know how to manage it now, I don't feel like it's a defective character, but I did previously.
And when you did you feel like it was in some ways a defining attribute of your personality? Like if you know what I'm saying?
I would say I felt like it was like a sign that I'm weak. And I come from a family of everybody was football players and, you know, boys don't cry and that whole mentality, you know, don't show your feelings, keep a stiff upper lip. And so for me, for a long time, you know, I associate it with being weak, which is another reason I didn't want to talk about it, because I don't want to be considered weak. Because men in my family were not weak. You know, it's just the mentality, I guess.
After your father passed away in that accident, would you take me back to maybe the year following that, and maybe project yourself back into what your emotional life was like, or your interpersonal life with your friends or your family? Did you withdraw a little bit? It sounded like you got involved a little bit into self-medication with alcohol and drugs, potentially. Do you have any additional light to shed on how that tragedy and a notion of maybe not wanting to be a weak male, do you have any insight potentially into how those potentially contrary instincts might have weighed on you at that time?
At the time, I didn't. But yeah, looking back, that was a tough year. Kind of the one cool thing about it is my family really pulled together. We all were really close. We all stayed home, and we were pretty tight. We were shaken and devastated, but we hung out a lot. We started having family game nights. We'd play like Trivial Pursuit, or we'd rent movies from, Blockbuster Video back when people still rented videos, and we did things like that. At school, I was more withdrawn for a while. I still kept up my good grades because my parents always, they're both have graduate degrees, and they always firmly instilled in us that we must get good grades. C's were unacceptable, B's were okay, but they expected straight A's. And so I kept getting good grades, but I did start sitting in the back of the class more and kind of distanced myself from a lot of my friends, except for 2 or 3 friends that I hung out with a lot. I remember that was my 8th grade year, and I was culminating from 8th grade, getting ready to go to high school. And at our 8th grade party, a friend of ours threw this big party at their house, and I just walked away from the party and went over to this fence, looking out on this field, and just started sobbing because I just, my dad couldn't be there for that. This was, several months after the accident, but he had his accident on August, like in the middle of August, right before my 8th grade year. But he was in a coma for 9 months, so he didn't die till April 9th, 1988. And so it was like a month and a half before my 8th grade culmination. And so it was really raw because, it was only a month and a half after he finally expired. And it's not having him there really hit me. And some of my friends tried to come and console me, but I just didn't want to be around them. And I just went and got high and drunk later after I left that party. With my older brother or my friends. I don't remember who it was with. Those years are kind of a blur.
And you mentioned earlier that you, with your sponsor and the resentment that was tied up with your father's tragedy, and specifically in that moment with your brothers blaming you and your resentment towards your brother for blaming you, that you burned that resentment. Do you now in your recovery and in your self-care, does your father play a role in whether it's your daily life or a routine over time of helping you or giving you strength or a sense of encouragement from, in some ways, maybe a universal or spiritual connection to him at all?
Yeah, I would say so. There's times when I'm doing things. I've taken on a lot of challenges over the last 12 years, and be it going for a master's degree, writing my book, or doing a big race. And I have doubts, I have insecurities, and besides just praying to my higher power, I pray to my dad, to help me get through it, because I guess, no matter how old I get, I still always want to make my dad proud. And I feel like his presence is there with me sometimes. I wouldn't say all the time, but definitely, I feel like he's guided me here and there along the way.
And you said earlier that you feel like your sense of the higher power is sort of the universe at large. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
Is there more to that when you think about a higher power and even as you were mentioning earlier, how would a God allow this to happen to your father, to your mother, to your family? Have you, in any sense, there's there's an expression that I've recently heard. I'm not sure if it's from a fellowship necessarily or just a friend of mine, but that the notion that life happens for you, not to you. Do you have a sense after this time on your life story, have you in some ways framed the events of your past in any way? Have you had any desire to view these as the workings of a higher power and found any meaning or purpose to them?
I would say to some degree, yes. My thoughts tend to be sporadic and race around that. Part of me, I think maybe because I'm bipolar, I have a hard time looking at the world in an optimistic light. My default is negative or pessimistic thinking. And my sponsor has taught me that I am responsible for my second thought and my first action. Because a lot of times my first thought is kind of batshit crazy, or, what's the other expression my grandma taught me? If it's not nice, then don't say it at all, So a lot of times my first thought is not the nicest thought. So I have to let that one float through and hopefully float away, to the lower power or wherever, and then think about it more and find a positive outlook. That's like a daily struggle for me.
Yeah, I can relate to that as well. I really like that advice. Your first thought, it could be negative, it could be sort of misguided, it could be evil, I think, in some ways. Like, I feel like sometimes the first thought I have might be even evil.
Yes.
Or a negative, knee-jerk, hateful, but that second thought, think better about it, and then that first action, what you do based on that second better thought, keeps you maybe doing the next right thing. That just really, I know I just kind of just repeated what you said, but that just really resonates with me, Tim. I really appreciate that insight. What would your goal be, both with respect to yourself and maybe the story of how it plays out with your book, with your exercise regimen, with potentially inspiring other people? If you could cast a story for the next period of time, whether it's one day at a time or whether it's 1 week or 1 year, how would you write or like to see the next chapter of your life play out?
Well, that's such a good question. I would like to see, a lot of people get a chance to read my book because it's a great story. It's a story of recovery, redemption, and resilience. Right now we're stuck in COVID times. I would like to get the chance to be at bookstores doing book signings and kind of, just talking about my story and sharing my journey with other people. I would like to go to, more dual diagnosis units and 12-step places and, kind of spread that message. I would love to see my book kind of propel me to a new career of some sorts. Right now I'm leaning towards coaching, like life coaching and other things outside of the classroom, because I've been in the classroom for 20 years and, I kind of really interested in some sort of career change, just for my own intellectual stimulation and kind of get on a new path. So I would love to see the book kind of guide me and my higher power, lead me to something new and challenging and different, where I can still help a lot of people.
Well, Tim, I really appreciate that. I sincerely hope that works out for you. And I want to thank you again for joining me here today and sharing your story with me.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you again to Tim Davis. You can get Tim's book, Tripolar, at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Book Depository, and through several other stores listed on his website at ultratimdavis.com, where you can also sign up for coaching, connect to follow him on social media, and subscribe to his blog. Take care, Tim. It's been a pleasure. That wraps up this episode. Please follow me on Facebook at Crazy Right Asher for live stream interviews where you can personally join me in my virtual studio and share your story, or tune in to watch others share live in real time. That's Facebook at Crazy Right Asher. Write a review, rate this podcast, subscribe, and share it with someone you care about. I'm Dave Asher, and I'm glad to be here.